Welcome back to the Gentleman's Gazette. Today at Amara, Hark, Bespoke shoemaker in St. Paul. Hi, Mara.
Hello. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, I was always curious, why do you care about bespoke shoes?
Me personally?
Yeah.
Wow, that's a good question. Why do I care about them or why do I make them?
Well, why do you care about making bespoke shoes?
Yeah,
Is it something?
that's
What
a
what
good
what
question.
about it speaks to you? Why did you
Yeah.
choose it?
Yeah,
How did you get
that's a really good
here?
question. Okay, I'm going to do my best to answer. And this will be my answer today. It might be different than yesterday, and
Of
it might be
course,
different than tomorrow.
of course.
But I think that making shoes is one of the hardest things that I've done. And I tend to gravitate towards and be drawn to things that are difficult. And I also think that the process of making shoes is really singular and it's really long, and a lot of it is hidden and very private. And that kind of the closeness of the relationship that I have with the work, like physically, is appealing. Um, and I'm able to make something for individuals that is totally unlike any other object that they would have to hold, much less wear on their body. So I think that, the process is part of it, the materials are part of it, and the relationships that I have with my clients are part of it. Yeah.
Yes, certainly. It's like a mix of crafts,
Hmm.
art,
Hmm.
and also the client interaction with the customer.
Yeah.
So some might say, hey, bespoke shoes are really elitist.
Hmm.
Are are
Yeah.
are custom shoes elitist?
That's a good question too. I guess it depends on who you ask and who's giving the answer. I don't think so, but I will say that they're expensive. And there's not many people who do this. And so, on the one hand, there's a lot of ways to talk about payment and the cost, which is, paying a living wage for a person living in the United States.
Absolutely.
The cost of materials, hourly, the cost of hourly wage. We don't really make that much money, actually.
No, that's the point, right?
No.
If you're curious about how a pair of shoes is made, check out this series that we're doing, or we did in the past,
Yeah.
and you see how many hours going, like on average, how many hours do you put in?
I say between 40 and 100 hours, but I think I say like working time is one thing, but like also interfacing with clients is another thing. And then upkeeping the workshop is, like it's not just doing the shoes, but you're also maintaining a workshop and it's also a business.
Yeah, you have to sharpen your knives, and
Sharpening the
sometimes
knives.
you have to think about it, right? And
Yeah.
customers come in with special requests and
Yeah.
all that stuff.
But it is like the making time itself is, I say 40 to 100 hours,
So,
depending on the pair.
yeah. So even if if you charged just for the labor costs, if you charged $40 an hour, we're talking $1,600 to $4,000 just in the labor and
Yeah.
materials for smaller, workshops like you have to buy through a distributor, through a wholesaler. So they want to make a living.
Hmm.
They mark it up compared to what,
Hmm.
an industrial factory may get for the same
Yeah.
instance.
I was just talking to someone about this. Our material costs have gone up significantly in the past couple of years. Like it's kind of startling when you sit down and like do the math of how everything is working out. Yeah. But whether it's elitist or not, I mean, there's not many people who do it. So you have to be driven to find a custom shoemaker. Um, and I don't feel like I'm elitist. I really strive to make shoes, and I do make shoes for all kinds of people, from folks who have orthopedic situations or their feet are kind of they don't fit off the rack shoes, to people who are doing heavy labor and they need something that's going to hold up, to people who are wearing like walking on carpets all day and not very hard on their shoes at all,
Yeah.
and everything in between. And so because of that,
I mean, if you make minimum wage, you have to save up money, probably. You cannot. It
yeah.
has to be a very conscious effort where you're like, I want this for my feet, I want this
Hmm.
for the process.
Yeah.
But it's a
It's an investment.
project.
Well, I heard somebody was talking about the history of cowboy boots,
Mhm.
and historically, a cowboy would and could expect to pay about a month's wages for a pair of shoes, for a pair of boots, and that was considered normal because it's a tool.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's kind of accurate still.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
Mhm.
So, you mentioned not many bespoke shoemakers are still in business in the US. Maybe
Mhm.
there never have been.
Mhm.
How did you get into this?
Well, the short answer, I always say that this job chose me.
Hmm.
But I started when I was getting my MFA at the School of the Art Institute in Chicago, and I was in a program for graphic design. Actually, I was a photographer and a writer previously, and I was in a very bad car accident, and I had a head injury, and I couldn't. I was having a lot of physical and cognitive issues that did not allow me to continue with photography or writing. And I took a shoemaking class, and I was able to do it. And it's partially because I come from a family of bookmakers. So I've always worked with my mom is a paper maker.
Hmm. Nice noodle
Um,
papers.
yes, yes, she's pretty astounding in her own right. But I've always worked with book arts and like I know how to bind books, and it's kind of similar to making shoes in that it's you're seamlessly covering an object.
Hmm.
And so the one kind of memory that I didn't lose in my accident was my muscle memory, and so my body could do these actions even if it took my brain a while to assimilate everything. And so that's how I started.
So, no, bespoke shoes and factory shoes are just so different. The amount of time it takes, the way they're made.
Hmm.
Um, but one thing I found interesting is like leathers. I've noticed recently things like, cordovan has gotten really expensive, and people often like them for ready-to-wear shoes.
Hmm.
But what are leathers that you like, for bespoke shoes, and what's
Sure.
what's the difference there? And where you may be like, well, this may be great for ready-to-wear shoe,
Mm.
but for bespoke shoe, actually not the best option.
Well, a great example is cordovan. Um, I think that one of the beautiful parts about handmade footwear is the leathers that we use. They're really super beautiful and they have a lot of characteristic. They don't have a finish over them. They're not. The leathers that I choose to use um, just have a transparent dyes, and so the characteristics of the actual leather are apparent.
They're
A lot of
all
times,
top grain,
yes,
unsanded,
100%.
non-coated,
Yes.
because with so much labor cost, it'd be foolish to use anything but the most premium materials.
Yeah, and also too, like using beautiful, like you get a more beautiful object, but it's a more pleasurable experience for myself. Very selfishly, using wonderful materials is pleasurable. Um, but I'm not a factory. And so I'm making small objects and I have the luxury of cutting out from like a larger piece of leather. Whereas a factory doesn't have that luxury. And so they might be more apt to use a corrected grain. Um, I don't use any corrected grain. So, the leathers that we use are a little bit different than factory leathers. I Every project is a little different. So, I use a lot of different kinds of leather, and I always start with how are you going to wear your shoes and where are you going to wear your shoes? Because if you're wearing them
Very
in,
purposeful.
yeah, if you're wearing them in St. Paul, Minnesota, and you do a lot of walking outside all year round, it's going to be very different wear on the footwear than if you're living in
Palm Beach,
Palm
Florida.
Beach, Florida, or Amarillo, Texas, and you are wearing them sometimes, or you are there for an occasion, if it's for a wedding, for whatever. I mean, like, so that it starts with function, and then we kind of, plan backwards. So I use a lot of different kinds of leather. The cordovan that we use is also not corrected and doesn't have any top coat on it. So that's one of the things that I always tell clients that cordovan that we use, it requires a lot of maintenance in order to keep the sheen that's so beautiful. And cordovan as a material, it's really tough and really hardy, and it's kind of challenging to work with. I don't mind it. Like like the struggle is kind of fun sometimes, but
Do you like hard things, difficult things?
mm, glutton for punishment. Um, but the first time I made a pair of cordovan shoes, of course, I tested it on myself, and I was like, "Wow, these are so beautiful." And then I noticed that as I was wearing them, like the sheen was different on each one. And cordovan has kind of like a nap, kind of like corduroy. And I didn't realize that the first time I used it because figuring it out on my own. And I had, cut it for economy and the vamps were going different directions and they reflected light differently. And I was like, oh, like amateur mistake. But that is a factor. Like on a factory shoe, the cordovan is going to be more corrected. It's going to have a glaze over the top. The next thing I noticed was that I walked out to my car and there was dew on the grass, and like little specks of water made little specks on my shoes. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I don't like upkeeping my shoes because it's just not what I choose to spend my time.
You have
Like,
enough work already.
yeah, I would rather, spend my time maintaining, like polishing my new pair of client shoes and like maintaining my own. So the cordovan actually got really beautiful and really cool because it got really matte. It was very, very different than what one would expect from like a factory cordovan. But what did not change was that like the nap was always different. So they always appeared to be a slightly different color. So,
And I think cordovan also, as you walk, like in the break,
yeah,
you really can see it.
yeah,
And it's almost a bit like it kind of stretches a little more, I find, than
yeah. It
others.
has a very different ring. So like every animal or every leather is going to have a very different way that it breaks. And cordovan is very particular in how it does it. It's much more like wavy, I would say. It doesn't want to crease.
Would you say that, because cordovan is a bit more unique in that way, it's almost better suited to ready-to-wear shoes because it
So.
conforms more to your foot versus if you have a bespoke last, this is already made to fit you perfectly. Now you put the cordovan on, now it gets a little more stretchy and it's a little bigger.
Yeah, well, my cordovan shoes actually shrunk, but I left them outside in a rainstorm. And so mine totally shrunk and they did not want to grow back.
Okay.
So that I can say, like, if you leave your shoes outside in a rainstorm, that's again, like, don't do that. I didn't know it was going to rain. I just totally forgot them outside. But I think that, I don't know the particularities of how cordovan is treated like for a factory condition, but I do know that there are different shells usually than what I would have access to. And
do you like using Horween, which is like kind of the gold standard?
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah.
But there's so many. There's Japanese, Italian tanneries now.
Yeah, there's so many different tanneries. Argentina also. There's different places that make it. Every tannery is going to be a little bit different. But, if someone says, I want a cordovan shoe, I always say, why do you want a cordovan shoe? And sometimes that answer is, I want something that is expensive. And if that is the reason, then I would tend to try to steer someone towards something else. If they're if they want like to alligator. I mean, that is going to, if you're looking for something that looks expensive, people know that alligator is expensive. It wears hard. It's like hard wearing. If you want cordovan because you like the ripple of the wrinkle, or you'll want to do the maintenance or any of those things, great.
You want your customer to be aware what you're getting into.
Yeah, I don't want somebody to walk through through the rain and then all of a sudden their shoes get specks on them and then they get really upset because it's very expensive and then that would be horrible. It's kind of heartbreaking.
So you mentioned alligator and yes, people know that it's expensive, but I think there's also the connotation that it's like a delicate leather.
Yeah.
What's your experience?
I also know that it has that feel, and I have the total opposite experience. For me, my alligator shoes are super tough. And I think that, in the past 5 years or so, I've started using a lot more exotic leather, and which would be, for example, ostrich, alligator, caiman. Well, anyways, that's a whole other thing. Stingray. What else do I use commonly? Shark. And all of those leathers, they all have very, very different characteristics in terms of how they look, but they wear so hard. They just have a life to them. And they're beautiful.
Even like fish leather sometimes.
Yeah,
right?
Fish leather is like very thin, but it's like very, very strong.
Lizard? What's your experience with lizard?
Lizard, I've used it just a couple of times, and it stretched a little more than I was anticipating when I was lasting, but it was really cool. It was beautiful. And so again, there's going to be a difference between something that's old and dried up and new and very nice. Someone gave me some lizard that was not super easy to use because it's kind of old. But I find the exotic leathers are they're distinct looking in terms of pattern, but they just wear hard. And alligator is tough.
If you say elephant,
tough.
Right?
That's
tough,
the toughest thing. Yeah, but it's distinct and it's beautiful. Everything is tagged. It's not it's not there's nothing under the table.
They're all CETA certified, where it's there's a clear chain.
Yeah, you can.
Some people say alligator leather is the most kind of tracked leather, so you can truly see where did this exactly originate. You know, It wasn't just poached or.
No, no, for sure not. And two, like if people want the tags, like anything that is restricted, it comes with a tag, and then I can give the tags to that person. Absolutely.
So I know.
Yeah. So I have no interest in, under the table, like back alley leather dealing. Because I want to I want to be able to stand up for what I'm using. And if I don't know where it comes from, I can't do that.
Yeah. And then there's the classic calf leather, box calf or
Yes.
baby calf. Do you ever work with regular cow or bull hide?
Yeah, I'm actually making a pair of shoes or pair of boots right now that are Shark and American bison. And it's like a shrunken bison. They're just
Bison especially, it's a very kind of three-dimensional texture.
Super cool. Yeah, it's really beautiful. It's super beautiful. Yeah, I use those too.
And I think I would say that recently in the whole leather goods industry, the whole like veg-tan has become more popular. Some companies built a whole brand around it and argue that veg-tan is best and is high quality. What do you think about veg-tan versus chrome tan for shoes?
Well, I think that they're really good vegetable tan leathers and they're really good chromium tan leathers. And I wouldn't be hazard to say I prefer one over the other, because there's great ones and there are ones that are less maybe fun to work with in anything. And so, for example, these are vegetable tan leathers.
The green ones?
Yep. And it was lovely to work with. I've worked with vegetable tan leather that when it's wet, it kind of speckles a little bit. Made me a little nervous. It dried fine. I use both. And I don't necessarily use them interchangeably, but I do use both of them.
Yeah, and you're not afraid to be bold, right? Like this is like a green, like olive green with this like pink thread. You even like dyed the thread on your own.
Yeah.
To match the pink here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was always like, okay, if you polish those, are you concerned about it or?
Yeah, well, my strategy for polishing those would be no different than any other shoe, whereby I would probably look for a green cream polish, just to kind of moisturize. I don't usually bring my shoes up to a super high mirror shine, but you could certainly do that. I again, like, I don't do tons of maintenance on my shoes.
Yeah.
The leather is really nice. It should be good for a while. You can wear it really hard. And obviously, if you want to spend time waxing and polishing, you can bring up the luster, or you can just let it go and do its thing.
And I mean, one thing you mentioned with the leather, in a factory, things are either, stamped out or laser cut, right? And the idea is to have a consumption that uses the entire skin or hide. You're more like, oh, I'll pick the best one and make sure the nap goes the right way.
Yeah.
And like for alligator, I mean, it's a lot more tricky to cut that because it actually has naturally different patterns, right? So how do you go about that typically?
About like laying out a pattern?
Yes.
Oh, well, it depends on the animal. So like, because every design is singular, I work with the client to figure out how, like, if it is an animal that has different patterns. Like ostrich is another example. There are some like full quill areas that are very polka dot, some areas that are very like wrinkly kind of, and some areas that are kind of in between. And you can use all of those designs strategically. And so that's super fun, to be able to use the natural characteristics of the leather strategically in your design process.
Like ostrich, right? Like the leg ostrich.
Yeah, the leg is totally different.
Looks very different than the regular kind of dotted. Most people think of the dotted part as ostrich. So that's like they don't think about the leg part.
Yeah, or like the flanks and the neck and stuff they have a different pattern. Ostrich too is very soft, super tough. It's another great example of something that is very distinct looking and very, very tough.
So what about lining leathers?
Oh,
what's your choice there?
Well, that is something that I actually do use vegetable tan leathers. And I know that is not, everyone has their own choices. I choose to use vegetable tan leathers.
Just because you don't want the chrome salt residue to get into the skin of the wearer?
Yeah, I mean, like that is a big part of it. But the trick is that I use a lot of colorful lining leathers, and I know from experience that some colorful leather will like bleed through onto your skin if you don't wear socks, for example.
Mhm.
Um,
Especially if you have sweaty feet or if it's really hot outside and your feet
yeah,
sweat.
yeah,
The friction,
yeah,
heat,
yeah,
moisture,
moisture, like
that'll do it.
yeah. So I'm super careful about when I use a lining leather that's colorful. My lining leathers, the colorful ones are from Germany, and it's like super top eco grade orthopedic everything. They're just it's lovely to use. It's lovely against the foot. In the summer, I personally don't like wearing socks, so like this is what I choose to wear, and that's what
Interesting.
I like. You know, if you can have a red lining leather and your feet don't come out pink at the end of the day,
Nice.
or they shouldn't.
I wear my boat shoes barefoot, but
Yeah,
I have relatively like dry feet.
yeah.
I don't know if someone has like more generally moist feet. I don't know how that
Feet
would
are
turn out.
sweaty.
Yeah.
I mean, one of my cowboy boot teacher, he always was like, he was really you have to like coat the thread in wax, and said like the inside of your shoes is like jungle conditions. It's like moist, it's warm, it's dark. It's like the perfect thing for bacteria breeding, which is kind of disgusting. Um, but like people just people like your foot is like kind of like your armpit. It sweats a lot. It's
Yeah.
kind of gross, but
Yeah.
like I don't like the shoes are all leather, so I don't personally like wearing socks that much. They squish my toes. And with my shoes, they really don't stink because there's no plastic in them. I mean, if you think about wrapping any area of your body in plastic, it's going to sweat more, first of
Yes.
all, and it's gets stinky after a while. And so, like, that's another difference with factory shoes is that there's going to be plastic and paper somewhere in
Yes.
there. And so your body just responds to it as a body would respond, and it gets a little bit more moist and maybe a little more stinky.
I mean, the only area really where you use non-leather maybe is the sole, right?
So, like, these ones have rubber soles.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
You have a bunch of, I mean, there's obviously like Vibram soles
Mm.
and all kinds of stuff.
So all kinds of stuff you can
For a
use.
bespoke shoe, I mean, there's more alternatives.
Mm-hmm.
Walk us through like what
Yeah, so this
you
is
have a
just
bunch of cool stuff here.
bunch of pile of stuff. So again, when we start a design process for any project, one of the questions is how are you going to wear these shoes and where are you going to wear them? And so if somebody's working on concrete is different, as I mentioned, than somebody who's walking on carpet all day or hiking in the woods versus living in New York City. Or someone who lives part of the time in New York City and part of the time in upstate, and they want something to go between. So, soling can have a huge impact on your day.
But it's also like, yeah, if you're like you want a travel shoe, right? Where it's
Yeah,
like it's good for rain.
yeah,
That can be a cool thing. I
yeah.
recently had like I found like 3 pairs of shoes on eBay, and they were all like Gaziano girling, and they were in good shape. They were in my size, and there were 3 of them, right? And 2 had leather soles,
Mm,
and those I naturally gravitated more towards those,
mm.
and so I ended up getting the third one too. But I wasn't too sold on it. But it had a rubber sole, and the rubber sole was like basically all throughout.
Yeah.
And actually, having worn it, I'm like, this is actually good.
Yeah.
If you would have asked me before, I would have said, nah, I don't know, maybe classic leather sole,
Yeah.
maybe like even a toe tap. But the rubber sole can be really nice as a, even a loafer or a travel shoe. The sound is different.
The sound is different, yeah.
The grip is different.
The grip is different. The other thing that is really interesting, and I didn't realize this until I resold a pair of my shoes that were leather sole at first, and then I resold them as rubber, is that a rubber sole has more memory of the last. So over time, a leather sole will tend to curl up a little more. You mentioned walking in the rain. A leather sole, like as your foot bends and flexes at the joint, a leather sole, like leather remembers your movement, which is why leather shoes are so comfortable. They remember your body and how it moves. A leather sole is going to slowly move up, whereas a rubber sole is going to keep that original shape a little bit. And so if you are a person who doesn't like those creases, one way to kind of alleviate that is to go for a rubber sole.
Interesting.
Yeah, which I totally didn't realize until I did that. And I personally like don't love those creases.
Yeah. I mean, who does?
I mean, but the fact is like that they happen. Like if you see a shoe that doesn't have those, it's not been worn.
It's a natural material, exactly.
Yeah, so like those happen, but a
Or-
rubber sole is just going to keep that down because it's gonna not gonna have that memory of the movement.
I mean, you can actually iron them out.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like there are ways to deal with it, but like
That's a lot of
it's
work.
like a thing that you have to do. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, but like Vibram, I think there's the English ones. What are they called?
Dianite.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I have some of those back there. Yep.
I think they're heavier oftentimes, right?
Yeah, they wear a little differently. And so like one of the things, so there's some Vibram in here. This is like the classic 100s. I think they are. They come in a couple colors. But it's like, it's like kind of a classic, grippy thing. You have a separate heel cap so that you can have different heel heights.
Yeah.
Which can be convenient. But you can feel like this is pretty flat. It's not super spongy.
Yeah.
It
No.
wears hard. Like my partner wears a pair of boots that have these same soles, and he wears them hard. He wears them almost every day, and like, boy, are they ever wearing well. But it's like this is it's just kind of your classic rubber thing.
Yeah.
Something that's a little bit similar in look, but a difference in feel are these ones from Lacté Havea in France, which are a lot more spongy and soft underfoot.
You can just see like the look at that, how just the floppiness.
And if you squish
it's almost like Jello.
Yeah, I mean, like it's really it's super comfortable to wear.
Yeah, it kind of contracts, like you can see like you're standing on this.
Yeah, so it would be great for a concrete floor. Also, it's kind of similar to human cartilage. And so if you have knee or hip problems, these can be super, super comfortable to wear. So for example, these are going to be for those boots that I mentioned that are very rugged.
Yeah.
But the person who is ordering them is working on concrete and has sensitivity on the bottoms of his soles. So this has like the same kind of like rugged look. It's going to wear really well. It's going to have traction, but it's softer sole. And it's going to feel really different.
Nice. Okay. So let's say, this is great for a boot and for commando soles, but let's say I'm getting, like this loafer made.
Yeah.
What would you suggest if we were to go with
like a rubber situation?
Sole? Yeah.
Well, as you can see, I just made a pair of loafers with rubber soles. I like them. This is a Lacté Havea. They call them unit soles when the heel is connected.
But it's
same company, but a different pattern. So there's a couple different options. If you wanted to have a leather sole, you can put like a rubber half sole on it. It's a little bit thicker. It's not going to have the same sponginess.
Yeah.
Or you could go for there are leather soles that have rubber impregnated in here. So there's like a rubber section in the middle.
It's funny because typically these are the soles that you see on the entry-level Goodyear or like Blake Rapid. It's kind of funny. Like I've seen them. Like when I see that, then I'm always thinking of like lower end shoe.
Interesting. Yeah.
But it's you can do it with a Bespoke shoe. There's nothing that says
you can't. From the side you can't tell.
Yeah.
So like for example, I have a pair of those that I wear for biking because it has the same look as like typical formal wear, like leather bottoms shoes, but then I do have like the traction for riding my bike. So there's like I feel like for myself, there's a time and a place for almost everything. And it's just getting the right material for the right project. So, something like this would make a great travel shoe. It's going to flex really easily. It's going to be spongy. It's going to be traction. If you're walking in the rain, no problem.
And this is 100% natural caoutchouc or latex, right?
Yeah,
coming from like the milk on the tree in the Brazilian rainforest.
Yeah, it's a great company. And they have different colors. So if you wanted, for example, green or red or whatever.
This looks more like crepe sole, right?
Yeah, this is like your classic, what they call plantation crepe. This is laminated. You can see there's 4 different layers here. And so this is, again, this is really traction-y. It's a similar material to the Lacté Havea soles, but it's like less. It's not poured into a mold, obviously.
But it's a different company.
Yeah, this is from like it's from a place in LA. But these ones, I mean, like if you think about like Clark's in the 70s, like that's what they had, was like that. That's what kind of made plantation crepe. People always think like, what's that? And I'd say Clark's in the 70s, and they'd say, oh.
Now this is different. This is a lot softer again.
Yep. So that's, again, like these are the like Lacté Havea sheets.
Nice.
And so, these again can be mixed and matched. This could be used as it could be used in different ways. Or it could be used as a midsole. If you do need a layer, that's what I was kind of envisioning for these, is having these as a layer between different as like a layer of sponginess essentially between different outsoles.
Oh yeah, that's interesting because most of the time, many of you look at a shoe factory video, right? They always show how they're smearing like the cork paste
Oh
in
yeah,
between.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
you use actual pieces of cork
yeah,
sheet, right? That you
yeah.
cut
I've
out
had
and
a
put in.
couple different things. Yeah, like cork, wool, leather at times. Yeah, again, it's like
And you could also
kind of
see
depends.
putting this in
Well,
there
this
too.
one, no, I wouldn't put it in as like a fill, but like
Yeah,
rather as like a midsole. So like you can see right down
yeah,
here, there's like a white layer.
yeah.
So you can kind of build up layers in the soling.
Just get a midsole to get a little bit of. I had that once in a heel where there was a
Mhm,
bit of foam, so it was
mhm,
leather, foam leather,
mm.
and you could really
You can
feel
feel it. Yeah.
how it would soften the impact
Yep.
as you walked.
Yeah. And so that's what I was kind of envisioning for these sheets. For
Ah,
again, like somebody who has joint issues or working on concrete, etc.
standing all day, and it's a natural material,
Yeah.
but you get this kind of comfort. So this is also not going to wear out.
Yeah, it's super cool. Yeah, people think, oh, if it's soft, it's going to wear faster, but that's not the case. Yeah, so these are just different like thicknesses of whatever of the
Thicknesses.
plantation crepe.
And what do you got here?
And these are Dr. Soul soles, and these come in several different models. But they are kind of popular right now. It's what I have on my boots.
Hongchang Shoe Parts Company.
Yeah,
Original Dr. Soul cork oil resistant.
yeah. So they have a lot of different different kind of models. They're popular right now amongst kind of heritage boot wearers.
Yeah,
They're a little on the heavy side.
definitely.
They're tough though, and so if you have a more rugged boot, this is a great one.
But what is it? It doesn't look like just cork. It looks like maybe cork
No, it's
specks.
cork and rubber. It's like a mix.
Yeah.
So a lot of times, like one of the things that can be challenging about rubber or about using not leather as soling is the adhering it together,
Mhm.
because the fear for me is people's shoes coming unlaminated.
Yeah.
That's a nightmare. And so all of these different materials take different processes to make them stick. And so, you know, that's challenging. And the more you fold into your repertoire, the more testing you have to do to make sure it's like gonna not that won't happen. Um, so, this like my process for using the sole would be very, very different than for using the Lactahevea soles, even though they're both like a rubber material. Yeah. But when you're ordering these, like it should say like, what the materials are, and then you can figure out how to glue things or how to laminate them.
And when you use leather soles, you go for the kind of the oak bark tanned kind of
Yeah,
leather.
yeah. And again, it depends. So, like, I've gone through phases of using different things. Factories change over time. My practice change over time. What I'm aware of changes over time. My abilities
Companies go
change.
out of business, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So, so I've used a lot of different things, and there are, pluses and minuses. But yeah, a lot of it is like, yeah, oak bark tanned. Um,
Well, and sometimes it's also like the factory can go out of business, but it's like I looked at like kangaroo leather, for example,
mhm,
because there's a lining,
mhm.
because it's extremely thin but really
Very strong.
strong.
Mhm.
But then I did some research and I learned that in California it's actually illegal, right? And so I'm like,
Mhm.
well, probably California is always like a leader in the U.S. for lots of stuff. So maybe down the line this is going to be illegal all over the place.
Mm.
Maybe not good to invest in that now when there's that part of it, right?
Sure.
So, one thing that is often mentioned, and it comes up, with suits, like Italian suit, English suit,
Mm.
American suit. It's similar in the shoe world, right? You have like the Austro-Hungarian school of
Yeah.
thought, the British, and then
Yes.
maybe like, the Italian,
Mm.
French,
Yeah.
German.
Yeah.
What do you think of these classifications?
Well, I will tell you, this is my personal opinion, is that in the United States, we don't have any of those classifications, so we can kind of pick and choose what we want.
Yeah.
But I would say that if you're trying to figure out what those mean, I would think about climate, and the footwear has to follow the climate. And
I mean,
so,
stylistically, it's a bit like, if you look at old houses in the
mhm,
US, right? I live in a house that was built in 1901.
mhm,
You look, it has like all these different, it has a bit Victorian
mhm,
here. a bit of, Neo-Greek revival, a little bit like, neoclassicism,
Mhm.
a bit, Art Nouveau.
Sure.
Like it's just all mixed. Sometimes some Art
Yeah.
Deco in
Yeah.
there. Is it
Yeah,
like that with
American
shoes?
makers can kind of do that. For better and for worse. We don't have those kind of long-standing traditions, and we have a very varied climate.
Like the Norvegese welt, right? That's what they call in Italy, the Norwegian welt.
Sure,
What do
sure.
you call it?
Well, this is just a stitch. I mean, this is just like a braided
Okay,
stitch.
it's just a braid
So
stitch.
this is
Looks
nothing
nice.
fancy, like it's, but I would say that like thinking about footwear, English, like my teachers were English or English style or English trained. And England has always been kind of the center for menswear. And so if you think of like classic suits, also classic footwear, it generally maybe would be an English, that would be kind of an English thing. But England is kind of stormy and rainy. And so their shoes have to be robust and well built, and they have to last through bad weather, or like wet weather.
Yep.
So they're generally pretty well built. Same thing with German shoes. Like it's cold and kind of like, there's 4 seasons. And so it's like well built, but like they're German engineered, and Germany has an orthopedic trade.
Yes.
And so
huge orthopedic trade.
yeah, which is also impacts the style of footwear being made there. It's very
Sometimes they're not very, like I look at them, they're not very attractive, right? To
well,
my eye. But in
so
Germany,
like the
people love them in a way. Yeah.
yeah. So well, if you think about the design, maybe the function is the design is following the function, whereas an Italian shoe or French shoe is a little bit more southern, is warmer, and
Often more elegant, like the
it's a little like there's different
Austro-Hungarian
types of
wood-packed
lines.
sole, right?
Yeah, it's a
Triple
little thicker.
sole,
Yeah,
everything like
robust.
larger brogues.
Yeah,
Like the holes
everything
are
is
just
just
thicker.
robust.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like really like ergonomic. And so one of the things that I've used lasts from all of those places, and it's really interesting because I've learned a lot about fit and style, I think, like the hard way. But by looking at the lasts, German lasts are really comfortable. And part of that is like underfoot, they're really curvy. And so yeah, Italian, like
They also have like the toe spring, right?
yeah, more toe spring.
More toe spring. So when you walk,
Yeah.
you naturally have that spring built in.
Yeah.
Versus I think a lot of French or some English elegant, they're super flat, and that's why people all start using the toe tap, so
Yeah.
it doesn't wear so quickly.
But the other part of having a flat, having more or less toe spring,
Yeah.
is having a thicker sole. So a lot of those soles are a lot thicker, so they're not going. If it was flat, you just clomp. Whereas if it's thicker and there's less movement, then you'll roll. Whereas if you have a very thin sole, you're able to move. Like you still can bend at the joint, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And so that allows different styles to happen. It's interesting to like think about how design and functionality are work together or don't, because you can get some pretty clumpy shoes pretty quickly if you're using them too thick of sole with the wrong toe spring or whatever.
So do you have a house style? If someone just comes to you and says, "Hey, make me a pair
What's
of shoes."
your style?
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like I'm kind of like a jack of all trades. I mean, I don't want to make a shoe that I don't find attractive, and I want to be interested in what I'm making. And you have
a wide spectrum.
I have
Like you do women's shoes,
I do
you
a
do
lot of different
men's,
things. Yeah.
and you are artistic. So it's not just classic, Oxford Derby, brown, black. You do a lot of
No, I do a lot of
unusual
different
stuff.
things. Yeah, and that's like a blessing and a curse. Jack of all trades and master of none. I think that in some ways, if I could just like pick a lane and stay in it, I would be able to move forward more quickly. But I enjoy doing a lot of different things. Everything is always like you're always on your toes. And I think that hopefully, like long term, I have a wider understanding of footwear generally, and will be able to help my clients who are like, oh, I want a black Oxford, or oh, I want a boot that I have to wear on concrete that I have foot problems, for example. The goal is that I have a deep understanding, so I'm able to work with people in a productive way and not just have one thing that I do, and that's what I do.
What do you wish your customers would, you know, understand more of or better that would make your life easier?
That would make my life easier. Um,
Or just, you know, lead to a better product overall or
yeah, that's a good question. I don't totally know. Like, I wish that people understood kind of the physicality of this job. And a lot of people, I think, compare my work or handmade shoes to factory shoes. And like, oh, wow, that's like a factory shoe. And I always feel like factories try to do what we do. Like, our shoes should be leading the way, and factories try to catch up. We're able to be nimble and to pivot really quickly. And that is super freeing. And so that's one thing that I wish that people, that would understand is how skillful handmade, like how many skills are involved, and that it's not gonna like it's different materials, different processes. It's just a different thing than a factory shoe. And I think that because the end product can be very beautiful, people think like, oh, it's like factory made, but it's better and it's different and it's just like a different object entirely.
nice.
Yeah.
Where do you draw inspiration from?
Oh, everywhere. Um,
What are some like there's Instagrammers you follows or like
yeah,
people?
sure. I mean, like, so in terms of like technically making, like, fact is, I'm from Minnesota and I never even saw a handmade shoe till I made one myself, much less wore one. So I've since like traveled and visited and try to be as open as I can and like put as much into the world so I can hopefully get as much back, On Instagram, I've learned a lot of like technical things. Like, I really appreciate seeing how people make things, even if they're just showing the most perfect day. Like, that's the fact. People show their beautiful stuff.
But that's
Um,
Instagram in general, right?
that's
It's
interesting.
like
Yeah, like it's anything that you show
it's
is
like you look
hopefully
at it and
your.
you're like, oh man, everyone is here on a vacation and driving the
Yeah, everyone has
Lamborghini,
like their perfectly spaced nails.
and then you look at my life, you know, what am I doing
And my
wrong?
nails are all
Can evoke
snaggly.
these feelings, which
Yeah.
are not healthy, really.
No, I mean, well, I totally know. Like, we have good days and bad days. Like, we're craftsmen, and so like I try to be realistic about that and what I portray. But I know that not everybody is like that. The other thing is like some people just don't have an eye, and so they might be really proud of what they're doing and not see that everything is really crooked, for example, or whatever. We're all at different places, but I learn a lot of like technical things from Instagram. But I think like in terms of like color and design and like ideas and wear, I mean, all has to do with movement. And so I'm an active person and I move my body. Like, I swim, I'm outside. I have little kids that are learning to walk. So like watching them learn to walk and how they move their body is fascinating. Last spring, I did a residency at the University Arboretum, where once a month I would go and spend a day just in the plants, looking at how the folds and joints kind of come together, like what lines and curves look like on different forms. Because again, it's like three-dimensional and it's all curved, just like shoes. They kind of come together in interesting ways and have like incredible color combinations. It's like nothing gets more wild than plants.
Mhm.
Like, they're just so wild and cool. Um, and I read a lot and listen to a lot of books. And so like I think like I get ideas and I think about the hows of what I do and like where I am as like a human in the universe at this moment of space time, from like being intellectually stimulated in some way.
Nice, nice.
So, you have to be open. Yeah, I try to be very open. But of course, you can't catch everything. But
Absolutely.
yeah, inspiration comes from everywhere. Yeah, the
Cool.
beautiful world we live in.
Nice. You know, when it comes to factory versus bespoke, right? In a factory, you typically see plastic lasts.
Mm,
In a bespoke workshop, I often see wooden lasts.
mm,
Now, I am met with Saskia Widmer
mm,
through an event by like the Sartorial Club, and she mentioned, you know, she's like, well, I like plastic lasts because with changing humidity, they
mm.
don't change the shape.
That's such a good point. Yeah.
So in your studio, I've seen both. I've
Mm,
seen plastic lasts,
mm,
I've seen wood
mm.
lasts. So how do you decide what you work with and
Yeah. Well, again, it's like it's the preference is in the maker and also how that maker procures their lasts. When I first started, I was buying vintage lasts and then working with the factory to have them graded and multiplied. And those factories only made plastic lasts. And I was like, fine, great, whatever. But as I worked more and I had more variance in sizes, so, like size 48 plus down to like size 35, 34, like that's a huge range. And like a really huge plastic last is really heavy. And so I realized that like for larger sizes, I maybe prefer wood. Also, I do a lot of alterations on my lasts, and I just prefer to sand on wood than sand on leather. It's like a more pleasurable experience. So yeah, I use both, but usually when I'm ordering lasts, I go for wood just because it's a little bit more lightweight and it's more pleasant to work on. And I do a fair amount of work on all of the lasts.
And sometimes you see very few people, they do like the old school way where you start with this block of wood and then
Yeah,
kind of work it
like
out by
yeah,
hand and stuff.
yeah.
I mean, that just means it takes a lot longer and
Takes
you don't
longer.
necessarily get a better result.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand the beauty of that. And I also know that for myself, I end up kind of I started out, I've done all those different kinds of things. And so when I started really working hard on like altering lasts in earnest, just cutting them up, redoing everything, like all the different stuff, trying to figure out what I liked to work with, what shapes I was drawn to, what shapes I could make, how shapes functioned. Um, I quickly realized that a lot of the shapes that I was coming up with were pretty similar. And a lot of the shapes that I was buying larger lasts from and carving them down to were pretty similar. And so for me, I realized like there's not necessarily net benefit in like starting from scratch every time. It's more economical and also more dependable for me to have a kind of like a blank is how you call it. It's like a template essentially that I've worked with factories to come up with. So it still is like my design overall, but I'm working with last makers to make these lasts that I understand how the curves are, and then looking at someone's foot and their heel to ball to toe proportion, at their arch, at whatever, I can alter the lasts in a more intelligent way.
Yes, so it
And
fits them
it
better.
fits them a little better. And also to be more confident about if one foot is larger than the other or not, that I'm making them that it's going to be right. Whereas if I were making them both from scratch every time, I just don't think I would trust myself to make everything exactly the same. I think it would be super, super hard for me to do that.
No, makes perfect sense.
No.
So, who are some people in the industry, or maybe it changes, but people you look up to, where you're like, man, I like the way they do this, or I like the way they do that,
Oh,
or I'd love to go and learn from them based on the output that you see.
yeah. Well, that depends on a lot of different things. Like there are so many people who are so much more experienced than I am that I look up to in certain ways. Um, in the United States, Marcel, of course, one of my teachers, has been really generous with information with me. And he also has little kids, which, like, for me, has been
Relatable.
relatable. And also, like, I don't know, he's been really, really generous with me. And I've learned so much from him and spending time with him. Lee Miller, down in Texas, he is super generous with information also. And I think like a lot of people think about Lee and they think like, man, that's the life I'd like to live because he's so skilled. He's so generous. He has a good business. He has like a strong, like he's just has a really strong, he's a strong craftsman. Business is working, like, and he like runs and plays guitar and is so nice. And like all of those things are all enviable, like that's just lovely. And so those are two people that are close that I think of right away that I just admire a lot.
Maybe
And in
someone
different ways.
that you've never worked with. Like, who are some people where you're like, I never met them,
Yeah.
but I think their work is cool, and I'd like to
Yeah.
learn.
Noriyuki from Japan, he was just here in the United States. Like I really admire him. His craftsmanship is just impeccable. His ideas are cheeky and he's making artwork and making really amazing shoes, and he's also like sharing information and teaching. And so like those are all three things that I strive for, is like being generous and like making shoes that are smart and a little bit funny, hopefully, and sharing information, because that's how everybody improves. Like that's the goal. So so people who kind of imbibe that attitude, I enjoy. I know that like the culture in the UK is really generous with information. And so that's really awesome to know like there are folks that I can contact there and that I have contacted that I've never even met. I just contact them and they share all of this information, which is just like so generous and so meaningful, because I'm so far from anybody here, like I'm pretty isolated.
Yeah.
And so to know that there's like a community far away that is, supportive and helpful is like, it's just unbelievable. It's the blessing of the computer age,
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for your time.
That's
I
my pleasure.
appreciated it.
Yeah.
And I look forward to working on you with more shoes in the future.
Well, let's hope they turn out. Thank you. It's always a pleasure to see you.
Good.